Visit Sailboat.com for all your project supplies, tools, and instructions.
Hi, I'm Eric Grant with Sailboat. In this tutorial video, we're going to show you how to make a quick winter boat cover. This boat cover does not have boots at each one of the obstacles, but instead slits. The only boot is up here at the mast, and everything else is done pretty quickly. And using the fabric that's available from Sailboat, you can save money. Now, it does take a lot of time to make, but it is satisfying. And if you've got a tight cover like this, it'll protect your boat from the elements, especially in the freezing cold winter, which we're in right now. So let's get started and show you how to make your very own for your particular boat.
This is the quick winter boat cover process, which is faster and easier and less expensive than the traditional winter boat cover process, which we show in a different video. Why is that? Well, for one, instead of making boots at all obstacles, such as stanchions, a simple slit is made in the fabric and the edges are covered in binding. Second, instead of making zipper flaps, zippers are simply sewn along the fabric's edge, which is covered in binding. Those two facts and the material selection that we'll be using make the quick winter boat cover a lot less expensive and easier to make than the traditional winter boat cover. Let's get started and show you how to make the quick winter boat cover. We will be using the Sailboat fabric calculator to figure the materials list required. But first we need to take some measurements of the boat, and we need a rigid structure going from the mast to the bow to support the cover. Instead of using a wooden board, we'll use webbing for this quick winter boat cover. We need a length of webbing that goes to one of our winches, goes to the gooseneck at the mast, and then goes to the bow. So we made a rough measurement, and we made it longer than necessary. And all I'm going to do is I'm going to sew a loop on the end with a zigzag stitch. This is the black webbing with the eye that we put on, and we attached to where the tack for the Genoa goes. We went up here to the gooseneck. We didn't even wrap it around. We just went at that location and went straight to a winch and then cleated it. And now we have a pretty good structure for the cover to sit on. It's not like a board, but this is a quick cover, so this works in place of a board. What's required for measuring? Well, visit the Sailboat website and open up the fabric calculator. Scroll down to boat covers and click on that. First, you'll need to select the cover type. There's traditional and quick. Click on the question mark for a detailed description of both covers. We'll be making the quick winter boat cover in this tutorial. Will your cover tent to the lifelines or the rail? For us, it'll be the rail. Your first measurement is the length of the cover. To determine that measurement, measure from the bow over all of your structure, including the board or the webbing strap at the bow, then along the top of the boom to the edge of the transom from the end of the boom. 25 feet to inches is 300 inches. That's the length of our cover. The next measurement is the desired skirt depth. Click on the question mark for full detail of what that is. For us, we want the skirt to be about 4.5 inches, so we'll enter 4.5 inches. We'll be using a 60-inch wide fabric from Sailboat called Sure-Right, which is inexpensive and great for a quick winter boat cover like this. Click on the Calculate button and you'll see more fields that need to be filled in. The more you measure, the more accurate, but really you only need 3 measurements. One, 59 inches from the bow location, the second, the maximum beam location, and the third is the width at the transom. Because we're already standing at the transom, we'll start measuring there. We go over the top of the boom to the rail because that's where we're tenting.
Okay, I've got 10 foot. Okay, let's go to the widest point.
And the next measurement, maximum beam location over top of your boom. If your cover was going to the lifeline, you'd measure from that location, but we're measuring all the way to the rail on both the port and starboard sides.
Okay, I have 11 foot. 10, 11. And then we just go to the front, just 60 inches back from the front right here.
Our final measurement is taken around 59 inches from the bow going over your structure.
Okay, I got 6 foot right here.
So 10, 11, 6.
10, 11, 6. Okay.
The first measurement to enter is at the bow, 59 inches back. For us, it was 72 inches. Then midship, 139, and at the transom, 120 inches. Hit the calculate button. The Sailboat fabric calculator gives you all the details required for your particular boat. Scroll down and you can see a list of materials for your quick winter boat cover. These links are all clickable and they give you the quantities. Click on the cover fabric and we're going to be using a material called Sure-Right, available from Sailboat. Inexpensive and easy to work with. Great for a quick winter boat cover like this.
So the calculator tells me exactly how to cut my fabric, and this is our Durascrim pattern material.
Going back to the fabric calculator, you can see we need 19 yards of Durascrim. Panel 1 is 82, 2 is 121, and 3, 4, and 5. Let's cut those to size and seam them together with tape.
I need to cut 5 panels according to the calculator, and they have specific links for each of the 5 panels of the pattern material.
In this chapter, we'll show you how to work with the Durascrim pattern material to pattern your boat. Let's get started.
This can be done with a tabletop. I've actually laid my pattern material on the tabletop, and this table is 72 inches long, so I mark here at 72, and I actually put a 72 inches on there. And then all you do is just pull the Durascrim pattern material to the edge of the table and measure on. So now I need my first panel to be cut to 110, I believe, according to the fabric calculator. So that's right here for us for our first panel, and I will put the exact measurement that this is right here, so I know what panel that is. Let's just call it panel 1. Now we don't have to worry about cutting this perfectly straight, it just has to be approximate. The fabric calculator does give you some extra. So we're going to cut all of our panels like this, and then we're going to tape them together. So after they're all cut, we'll show you what's next. Before I tape any panels together, I've taken the panels and folded them in half, and I want to mark approximately where the center is. So I'm just using my marker and marking a C. So this is panel 1 and this is panel 2. There's the center line. That's where we're going to overlay it by about 1 inch. It doesn't have to be perfect there. Again, this is pattern material, but you do want to try to put it on so that everything is laying flat. So that's more important than anything, otherwise it can mess up our pattern. So right now it looks nice and flat. I'm just going to take some tape, packing tape, and tape it like that. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to move it down the table to tape the other half, making sure that it's laying as straight as possible. Okay, what we did is we rolled up the pattern material along its length so that we could unroll it at the mast. We're going to take out some of the packing tape, some double-sided tape, some of the strapping tape, a marker, scissors. We also have a length of polyester webbing, 1 inch, and we did sew a loop in the end. So I think we're ready to go to the boat. These should be most of the tools you need. Okay, in preparation for patterning, I'm using some strapping tape. This just allows me to remove the double-sided tape a lot easier because it comes off of a solid surface nicely. We're going to go all the way around, and our cover is going to go to the rail, not to the top of the stanchions or the lifelines. So I put the strapping tape on. It doesn't really matter where it goes. This is just going to hold the pattern material in place because we're going to put double-sided tape on top of it. So I've got strapping tape all around the perimeter in no particular spot. Now we're going to use 129, and you want to do this on a day where there's not a lot of wind. Hopefully you can find one of those. And we're going to put this right on top of the strapping tape, and this will give us the ability to pull off the double-sided tape once we're done. So we're going to go all around the perimeter of the boat with this, and this will stick beautifully to the pattern material. So at the gooseneck, I wrapped this with this strapping tape, and this is going to be the zipper between the bow and the stern, and we want to go down to the stanchions here, and looks like right here is the closest spot, so I can just have one slit. We want this to be fairly taut, so I'm going to put a lot of pressure on the tape here so that this is taut, and then I can have my zipper go straight down here. So I'm going to strap it right here to the rail. Like that. We've laid the pattern material on top of the boom at the end, and it's really best to do this with two people so you can kind of unroll it. But I'll show the process once it's unrolled, since I'm doing this all by my little lonesome. So this is the center of the pattern. I have about equal amounts on both port and starboard, and we obviously have to cut a slit here at the topping lift. And we're going to see if we have enough to cover the transom, which it doesn't look like we do. So I'm obviously going to slit it more until we have enough. And that might do it. So now I'll just unroll some more of this all the way to the mast. So we have plenty at the transom here that we can attach to our double-sided tape. I think what I'm going to do is just start over here on the side. And remember, we're not going over the lifelines. We're coming around here. Okay, so we have enough. It looks like we're going to hit everywhere. So here's our first obstacle. And what we're going to do is we're going to make a slit in this. And again, this isn't determining exactly how we're going to cut our fabric. It's just allowing the pattern material to go around the obstacle like such. Looks like I can go a little bit more because we have a little bit extra there. I don't want to go too far. I'm going to actually go a little bit of a different direction here. Nice. Okay, so I'm going to peel off my double-sided tape, and this is where I'm starting. I haven't done any double-sided taping, so I'm going to cut it so that I can easily get to it. Put the scissors back in my pocket, peel off the transfer paper here, and we're going to start at this stanchion. And don't worry about getting the wrinkles out. Right now we're just trying to get it in the general position that we need it to be in. So this sticks pretty good because there's not much wind. And then I should, after I get this portion stuck on, go to the opposite side and make sure I have enough material. And we're going to do the same sort of thing that we did over here. So I'm going to do that over here. So I definitely have enough material, and I need to make a slit. You probably can't see that because you're up there on the platform. Okay, we're coming up to the next obstacle, which is a stanchion for us. So again, I've actually got it pretty good looking. I've got hardly any wrinkles in here. We need to make a slit to allow the pattern material to relax around our obstacle. It's basically pretty easy to pattern a cover like this. I'll make as little of a slit as possible to see if I can work with that. And it looks like I might be able to. I got to go a little bit deeper. There we go. Pull the transfer paper, stick it to the double-sided tape. Looking good. We're going to go to the port side and go up to just about these stays where the shrouds are. Stays, shrouds, similar thing. Our job now, once we have the cover kind of in the right spot, is to cut this half away from this half. And it can be done by lifting up the rolled portion and then just putting your hand on the inside, making sure everything's flat. You just need enough to go to this tape. So basically that means I'm cutting it right about here. So let me get my scissors. And it's better to have more than too little. Good. So this is cut away, and I'll just flip it over here so you can kind of see. Notice I have plenty. So now we're going to do the same thing on the port side. So at the transom, we have to take up fabric. So you can see this is where we slit it. I'm going to start with some spring clamps, and I'm just going to clamp it in a few spots just to kind of pull it together. This is probably not the right spot, but at least it gets us something that we can work with. You can actually scroll up the fabric a little bit, which I think I'm going to do, and then clamp it again, because I need to take up some excess, I think. Let's see if that'll work. Give it a few clamps. Okay, so now we know approximately where this is going to come down by pulling on it. So we're going to make a slit for this because we're not covering this. This is going to be out in the open. Let's see if that's far enough. It's getting better. Getting better. And then we're going to have to make a pleat here. So let's just tape this down with some tension to our double-sided tape. I'll use my head. I'll come over here. We'll pull fairly taut here. Nice. We have this obstacle, so I'm going to cut a little slit right here to allow this to go around our pattern material. Maybe a little bit more here. There we go. Tape that there. Okay, put this here. Here's a big pleat here that's going to take out this excess fabric. So we'll put a line with our marker here. We'll do that a little bit later on. That'll take that out and give us a nice corner. And then we're going to work on this, doing the same thing over here on the starboard side. I've removed the pony clamps basically because I can kind of tell exactly where this is going to fall now with the sides on, and it looks like it goes almost right to there. So now I can reinstall them with a little bit more accuracy. We still have to create those pleats, which we're going to use office clamps for, so we can make adjustments to that. Office clamps are nothing more than these things you get from the office store. But it'd be good to have this pleat set in place so that we know what it's going to look like. So I'm going to crimp it up and put a office clamp there, or even one of those spring clamps would work. It's cold out here. It's almost winter. My hands aren't working as well as they should. So to create a pleat, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put little lines, and then I'm going to put a line on this side so that I know where that pleat goes. And I'll just do it kind of randomly so that I can go to the table and we can actually do a straight line. So there's where that one would be sewn together. And then over here, we definitely want to do it all the way to the bottom. And you want to draw up the extra fabric here and here. I think that'll be nice. And I need to get a ladder and do it up there as well. And put a pleat right there. And then obviously one directly across from it on the other side, so we know where that is. Gonna come down here, draw this fairly taut, put a pleat here, here. We have to do it up there at the top as well, so that's all gonna come out, and we're gonna do the same thing over here on the starboard side. We're gonna put a pleat that is similar to the pleat on the port side. If you find any kind of wrinkles and so forth, you can actually just apply it and rebaste it, but I think it looks pretty good. So we're just gonna go around doing this. The circle is a stanchion, but I'm probably gonna do slits like we talked about to make this fast. So I'm gonna put a line right where the stanchion rests, and probably even a line up here. But I definitely wanna put a crosshair to indicate where the center of it is, so we know exactly where that pole's coming through. And I'm going to do that at all the stanchion locations. So we don't have to worry much about this slit. It's just going to basically be butted up to each other, but we do have to worry about this. So we're going to put a little circle. This is a cutout or an obstacle. I'm just going to put CUT for cut. I'm going to also put right where the deck is, the white with the maroon. That isn't going to be probably where the cover ends. We'll probably have a skirt on here, but I want to do that consistently all the way around. Once you're happy with the pattern, here is another obstacle, so we're going to put a little circle at that juncture. The circles are going to indicate what needs to be cut out. Line there. This is a pleat, so I'll just put a P for pleat. But all I need to do is put a crosshair here. I know that that's where we're going to have that come through. So we just do this at all locations where we're going to have the cover open up. We did it here at the stanchion. We did a crosshair like that. We marked it here. Now we have to concentrate on these shrouds. So you can see that this is not allowing it to relax. So we're going to cut away some material here. And still going to need to cut a little bit more away. A little bit more. Now that is pretty good. Looks like I got a little bit. There we go. Now we want this to come across our tape. I need a little bit of relief here. Like that. Now the tape doesn't have double-sided tape, but it has a sticky side, and so sometimes you can actually stick it to that strapping tape to get a good pattern for this. So that looks good like that. I'm going to take my marker. Let's push that down a little bit. We're going to mark the edge. Covers like this don't have to be super taut like a Bimini or a Dodger. We're going to go right in the middle of the strapping tape. And we're doing this so that we can make the bow cover the same as the port cover. I'm sorry, as the aft cover. So I need to get up there on the boat and pull this fairly taut and mark on top of this tape right here on our pattern. And I do also have to mark where these shrouds are going to come through with my crosshairs, like that. I'll put a little circle there so I know, and we'll just mark it stay, S-T-A-Y. Okay, I'm going to get up there on the boat. So if you can notice here, there's a hard spot where there's an obstacle. I'm going to cut that away at the gooseneck. That allows it to relax a little bit. And as I talked about, I'm going to pull this fairly taut, mark on top of our tape. It's not totally accurate, but we'll straighten it out when we get to the loft table. We're going to call this a zip, and we're going to call this zip. And we also need to mark sout, because this is a starboard out. And on the other side, we need to mark it pout for port out. Here, we need to mark the mast basically is here. I know I have a slit here, but I'm going to mark basically where the mast is, and then we're going to write mast. Okay, and we're going to do the same thing on the port side. Oh, it's not a bad idea to write boom at the top here. Boom. To know where the center of the boom is. Okay. So what I'm doing here is I'm putting double-sided tape on top of our pattern. Now this will be troublesome when it comes time to get the double-sided tape off of the pattern, so that's why I'm only doing it at this point. But basically that means I can baste the bow panel to it. So I'm going to go on this side, and then I'm also going to do the same thing on the port side, just at this location. I'm peeling the transfer paper off, revealing that double-sided tape. Right here is the center. And I'm going to go and make a slit for the mast, obviously. It's basically the same thing like we did before, right at the center line. And I'm going to go fairly deep because I have plenty of fabric. We'll lay it up here and baste it in place at the top. Just at the top. Like that. And also on the port side. Okay, now I need to get down and do it to the rail. Okay, so don't worry about how the pattern is resting. You just want to try to get it to look good from this juncture where it's going to be basted onto the other one and where the zipper will be present. So I'm going to kind of put it down there. We have to get around this obstacle, so I'm going to cut some more slits. So the port side's attached almost all the way to here, and I need to get this straightened out before I go any further because there's just too much fabric here, so we're going to pull it to the front here. Yes, it does. Look at that. So here we got another obstacle here, a little bit deeper back. You can see it's kind of interfering a little bit. Okay, good. Now let's peel this off. the transfer paper. Let's stop right about there and let's get this side on so it's nice and taut. Okay, so I'm very happy with that. So now we have this area and we have to do the same thing on the port side. I'm going to cut straight down to this spot to allow me to go around the stanchions. And then we're going to take this and we're going to make it taut, press it onto that pattern material that we have up at the top up here. Same thing. A little bit hard for me to reach the double-sided tape, but that's pretty good. Now, we have a lot of extra, and while I'm up here, I'm going to take my marker, because this is right where the zipper is going to go. We're going to mark on top of the black line. I don't care if the line's crooked or anything like that. We just want to get really close to that line so that we know exactly where the panels are going to be sewn together. So down here, the line's over here on that, and I need to mark stay and zip and zip. Okay, that's pretty good. Now the mast, I'm at the mast, and I'm just going to mark a general location of where this mast is. So something like that. All right, we've got everything in place. I'm just transferring that line that we drew all around right to here till I get to the second one, which is right there. This is that zipper that comes down, so that line joins up with that. We need to mark a spot for this one, just like we did on all the other ones. So I can cut away this excess fabric. If it were windy, I would, but really we're done. So we're just going to start removing it. And you do want to get the double-sided tape off of your boat as soon as possible, especially if you're in high heat areas, because it can become harder to get off if you've got a lot of sun on it and heat. All right, we'll go to the loft table and we'll show you how to make this cover.
Next up, we'll be working with our cover fabric and seaming panels together.
So the Sailboat fabric calculator for the boat cover tells you exactly how to cut your fabric to size.
Looking at the fabric calculator, we want to look at the tent fabric panels. Here's the yardage required, and here are the cut lengths for each one of the panels. For our boat, we need 6 panels cut to specific lengths, and we're going to be using a 1/2 inch seam allowance.
So we're going to start with panel 1, and for me I need to cut it to 84 inches, panel 2, 119, and so forth. And it's all right there on the fabric calculator. We're using a material called Sure-Rite. It's very inexpensive. It's a polyester, and it does have a urethane coating on the back side. You can kind of see it. It shimmers a little bit in the light. And the reason that we're using this is for the cost. Usually the rolls are done like this, so this would be the outside surface and this would be the underside surface. Now I wouldn't say that for all the rolls, but typically that's how it's rolled when we ship it to you. The nice thing is you can do this with a small table. This table is 72 inches from this end to this end. And what I did is I put a mark here on a piece of tape at 60 inches. That way my roll could sit right here and I could mark it with my chalk pencil. And then I need 84 inches, so all I have to do now is just come over here and move the fabric down. So now all I need to do is add 24 inches from this mark. And so I just use my tape measure, mark it at 24 inches, and this should provide plenty of fabric. And you can take a T-square, but it's really not necessary to take a T-square because this is not our finished cut line. This is, this will not be the finished line. We do provide extra fabric in our calculations, so I'm just going to try to cut it as straight as possible using the roll as a reference. And no reason to use a hot knife because again, this is not our finished edge. So we're going to mark it P1 for panel 1 It's important to mark all your panels so you know how they go. So now we're going to do the exact same thing for the next panel. Go to the edge of the table. So we're going to clear this one from the table. So I've just cut panel 2, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to sew them together as I cut them. I have 6 panels in total. So I'm going to take panel 1 and 2, join them together, then I'll come back and I'll cut panel 3 and sew it together and so forth. You can do it any way you want, but that's the way we're going to do it. I got panel 2 on the bottom, panel 1 here, panel 1 smaller, so I'm going to put my double-sided tape. This is a seam stick 3/8 inch for canvas, and I'm going to put it right along that raw edge, but not hanging over the raw edge. We're going to do a 1/2 inch seam allowance, and we're going to do a semi-flat filled seam. So once I get this all the way down the length, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a canvas patterning ruler from Sailboat. You can use any hard object and just kind of press it down well. Now you got to make sure that you're doing it on the outside surface. This is the side with the urethane, so this is the wrong side right here. I can tell by the glare. So make sure you put the double-sided tape on the outside surface of the fabric. For big panels, what I do is when I run out, I just kind of move the fabric over, and there I'm already on the table, and I can move my sandbag for larger panels. That way I don't have to crawl on the floor to put this basting tape on and to seam the panels together. Now we don't have to find the centers, even though this has to be centered between the larger panel. All we have to do is go to the Sailboat fabric calculator and look in the rendering, and it'll tell you the offset. For us, it's 17.5 inches for the offset, and that is on the left side and the right side. So all I need to do is take a tape measure, and I basically mark at approximately 17.5 because these are oversized, and I know that that's where panel 1 will be started right here, and then when we reach the other side, it'll be very similar. So I'm just going to flip it. Outside surfaces have to face each other. I know that they are right now, and we'll just lay it flat on here. I will probably take my sandbag and just put it on the offset, and we'll start basting right here. Peel off the transfer paper. You can do that even with the fabric laying upside down, and all you want to do is just match up the edges starting at your offset point and baste without pulling or stretching on one fabric more than the other. So basically I'm just doing it like this. And I'll peel off transfer paper as I go and move the fabric on the table like we showed earlier when I reach the end. We want to test tension with 2 layers of fabric. I'm using a Tex 90 polyester thread and a size number 20 needle. We want to make sure that when we're sewing light fabrics like the Sure-Right that we don't get excessive puckering in our stitch. And that can happen if you have too much upper tension. So let's take a look at it. Okay, you can see there's some puckering going on here. The bottom side looks like there's a little bit of a knot, but it's not sticking out too much, so I'm going to reduce the upper tension by 3/4 of a turn. And let's see if that reduces the puckering. Yes, it did reduce the puckering quite a bit. You can just tell completely. And the back side still looks great. Our seam allowance is a 1/2 inch, so I'm going to put the magnetic guide on at the 1/2 inch, and I like to do it horizontally like this so I can see better. And I've got most of the fabric in my lap, and we're just going to start sewing here. This is going to be a semi-flat filled seam, so I'll do a little bit of reversing here, and I'll just carefully guide the fabric up against the magnetic guide as we sew. Okay, we're going to go all the way to the other end, and then we'll do some reversing there, and then we're going to flip the panels right side out and do a top stitch. And we'll show you what that looks like when we get to that point. Okay, so now we've got our first stitch done. I'm going to go all the way to the beginning, and I'm actually going to have to push the fabric through the throat of the sewing machine because we're going to have to splay it open like this. We need to remove the magnetic guide because we don't need it for a top stitch. Panel 1, P1, is the front. That means this is going to be up higher like this. So we want this water to roll not into the seam but over it like a shingle. That means the seam allowance has to go to the left. So see, you can see it's more like a shingle that way. So that's how we're going to determine our seam, which way the seam goes for this panel. Now other panels may be different, but just think of how the water's going to run and make sure you create that shingle by rolling that seam allowance to one side or the other. I'm going to use the left side, I'm going to use the right side of my presser foot as a guide, and I'm going to get this fabric started, making sure that my seam allowance is on the right side, or the left side I should say. There we go. So I've got a clear path for up to this point. I just want to start sewing, and then I can push more fabric underneath the throat of the machine. I'm not going to do any reversing there because I don't necessarily, that's not the end, so I don't have to worry about that. This is the stitch that everybody's going to see, so pull left and right as you sew, and if you stop to make adjustments, make sure your needle is buried like that. Now I'm going to push this fabric through the throat of the sewing machine to get it started under there. Got a lot of fabric on my lap. There we go. That's all it really takes. And make sure the seam allowance is going to the left for us for this one. Make sure we're not sewing through any excess fabric. As you go, you can stick your hand underneath to feel that. And that's as easy as it is. When we get the other side, we'll join the next panels. Okay, this is the panel number 2 that we just sewed to panel number 1. This is panel 3. Panel 3 is bigger and the offset is 10 inches, so I marked it at 10 inches. And I have panel number 3 on top. So that means panel number 2 starts where we marked it at 10 inches right there, and we basted it in the same manner. So these panels are basted together. We're going to sew our top stitch in the same way, just leaving the bulk of the fabric hang off the end of the table. After that, we're going to show you scrolling it up and sewing the top stitch. Then we're going to do the same thing for all the panels. We won't be showing any more of that after we show rolling it up. My first stitch is done, and I thought we would have to scroll it up, but we don't have to. All I need to do is go back to the beginning again, and I can feed the 60-inch fabric through the throat of the sewing machine just like we did with the first panel. In fact, we can do that with all of them. So this job is a lot easier because of the fact that we're putting it together as we baste it, each panel one by one. So just do the same thing again. My seam allowance is going to go to the left because nothing changes except for when you get to the transom, and we're not even close to the transom yet.
In the next chapter, we'll be patterning our cover fabric to size using the pattern material that we made earlier.
This is our Durascrim on the tabletop, and what I like to do before I put it on top of the fabric is to cut on the outside line. Now, there are some slits and so forth, and there's some marks that we put over here, and sometimes what I do just to keep those marks as a reference is I cut around them, and then I cut on the line. And if there's anything that looks like it deviates, I basically just straighten it out with my scissors. Now when we come up here, we have a pleat. This is the transom or the back edge, and that pleat has fabric or Durascrim pattern material that's missing. And here's how we'll deal with it. Now here again, here's a cutout that I want to leave all those markings in place. This will run into that because when this pleat is put together, these two should line up. So I'm going to leave this, not cut it, but I'm going to start cutting over there. So we're just going to cut around in this manner, and we'll take it to our fabric. We have our fabric laying on a large floor. We have the opportunity to have a floor like this. If you don't have that, you'll need to probably go out to your driveway or find a gym that you can borrow, maybe from a church. This is hard to do on a table, even for a small boat like this 22-footer. So we laid the fabric so the outside surface is facing up, and we placed the bow cover, our pattern material, at the front, and the rest of the cover material over here. And when you can see that the calculator calculates just about perfect for fabric, except for at that front panel because we measured over top of the webbing. But this is going to work great. So we cut around the perimeter of the pattern material as we showed earlier, and I put a few sandbags on it. We're going to start with this pattern in back. This is a boat cover, not a Bimini or a Dodger. And so what I did is I took my chalk pencil and I just put lines right at the edge here. Now we have to add a ½ inch for seam allowance, but we'll do that later, all around the perimeter. Here's a stanchion, and remember the bullseye is the most important part. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open this up. I'm going to put a line going that way pretty heavily, And then obviously this line's a little bit off, but we're just gonna break the distance of those two and put a line here. And you could mark it stanchion, but as long as we know that that's just a cutout, we should be good. So we're gonna do that at all stanchion locations, and we're gonna mark around the perimeter like that. Now let's go over here to where the zippers are. You can see that nothing's really laying perfectly flat, and that's perfectly fine for a boat cover. We marked it all the way to the corner. This is a stanchion. I put an X basically at the middle of the bullseye here. Actually, these are stays, not stanchions. And then there's a zipper here and a zipper here. I could mark it zipper, but I'm pretty sure I can figure that out. So here is where we have a patch here. And if I move this one out of the way a little bit, you can see that we didn't have enough material here. And so I just continued the line up here, and then we'll have a line come down here, and we'll do the same thing on this side. Okay, so here's the boom. Remember, we marked the boom, so we know if we follow that straight up, that this right here should be the center line or midship. Okay, so we'll just keep marking around. Everything. This is a part that's missing some pattern material, so we'll just continue this down as though the pattern material were there. Obviously, you want to just think this through, and then this goes like that to the corner. So here we are at the transom, and this right here is a pleat, okay? So I've marked it up to this point, and this is missing pattern material, but there's a pleat here, so I don't have to worry about that. I need to mark it over here, because this is where it's going to join up. So we continue to mark around the perimeter. Now let's do the pleat. So the pleat, we need to add a 1/2 inch from there. And I'm not going to add the 1/2 inch now. I'll add the 1/2 inch when I cut it out. So what I need to do is either cut this out with scissors so I can mark it, and that's what I think I'm going to do right now.
That's dumb.
Because I don't want to disturb the pattern, I'm just going to cut right on my pleat. Now I do have to add a 1/2 inch seam allowance, and you can strike a line if you want, but as long as you stay approximately in line with all your marks, you should be fine. So I want to go all the way up to the point up here. And even if your line isn't perfectly straight, it should be fine. So there's the topping lift, or at the end of the boom. And we're going to do the same thing here. Now this just makes it possible for us to easily mark for the pleat, because I don't have to worry about lifting the pattern material and disturbing it. So I'm marking here right at the pleat. Remember, we have to add a 1/2 inch, but I need to make sure that I mark for this obstacle. So there's the crosshairs for it, right here and right there. Make sure it's heavy so it doesn't come off. And we're going to do the same thing over on this side. Before we cut out the one at the middle, I'm going to put a sandbag on this side, weighted sandbag on this side to make sure that it doesn't move, because we want that slit to basically be right next to it's where it's at. And then we're going to cut it out in the same manner that we did before. So it'd go all the way over to here, and I'm just going to follow it all the way up to the end of the boom. This is a pleat on this side. What we're going to do is we're going to cut that out and mark it just like we did on the, what side was that? The port side? I think it is. Yeah, port side. This is the starboard side. So that is really strange looking, but that will make the transom do what we want. We'll probably sew a zipper in here. You don't have to, but we want to have access. So we're going to do that. So this one is completely different from that one, so you don't have to have it butted up to it. I know that this is outside the pattern, but it just gives me an idea right where the mast is. So I go ahead and mark that, and then we're just going to mark around this and mark all the cutouts just like we did for the one at the rear of the boat. Okay, in an effort not to get confused, it's pretty hard to in my opinion. There's sout, so I'm just going to lift this up and mark sout and pout on the fabric softly, so I know that at various locations. Now you can either cut it on the floor, and I do recommend using a hot knife. You don't have to because this has a urethane coating on the backside. We're going to take it to the table to do this because we can just move the fabric and cut on that table, but it might be easier to do it on the floor. I just don't like being on my knees. Oh, and don't forget that you need to add the 1/2 inch around the entire perimeter, and even for the pleats and zippers.
Now we're going to cut our cover fabric to size.
We're going to cut this out with this serrate edge hot knife. These are my 3 pleats at the transom, and there's not much fabric joining them together here, so I'm not going to cut the pleats until I get it cut around the entire perimeter. So I'm using the serrate edge hot knife. This is the cordless version, which means I don't have a cord to deal with. And it's also got that precision cutting blade and foot installed, so I don't have to have glass down here. So I'm going to estimate at the 1/2 inch seam allowance. You don't have to be terribly accurate with this because, again, it is a boat cover. If you want to use a tool to get exactly 1/2 inch, that's your choice. This material seems to bond to itself after it's cut, so I pull it away as I cut, and that keeps it from bonding to itself. And you can release the trigger every once in a while to cool down the knife. So I'm going to cut past the pleat, and we're going to cut one out at a time and sew it together. So don't cut the pleats out yet. This is the bow section, and this is where the mast goes. I know I don't need this in here, but I'd rather just have the location. So I'm going to do that. And then I use the hot knife on the other one. I do want to show you using scissors to cut it out. So again, I'm a 1/2 inch from my marks. And if you use scissors, you can kind of do this really quickly. And since there is a urethane coating on it, it actually doesn't unravel too much. So don't feel bad if you don't have a hot knife. You can do it with scissors.
In this chapter, we'll be creating the pleats to take up the excess fabric.
So this is our pleat on the starboard side. We want to do 1 pleat at a time. And this is the one we're going to start with. Then we'll do the port one. Then we'll do the middle one at the middle midship. What I want to do is I want to go to the peak of the pleat with a straight edge, and then I want to find the closest markings and strike a line on this side. And I know this is going to basically include my 1/2 inch because you can see I'm well inside the lines here. I know this is different than what we patterned, but it makes it easier for pleating. So I've struck a straight line there, and you can see we're about a 1/2 inch outside of it. Then we're going to do the same thing over here, but before we do that, we need to take a measurement to the edge of the cover, and I get 55, oops, I got to go to the peak here. I get 55.5. So I want this pleat to be the same. I want it to be 55.5 as we put it on there at the top and find our most average location and then strike a line. So make sure this is the same. That way when you go to seam it, it'll be even at the bottom. So now we're going to cut on those lines, and those lines are the equal lengths, even though they're not exactly on our pleat marks, and then we'll seam it together. We'll show you how we do that next. Okay, so now that we have those 2 sides the same, I'm going to put double-sided tape on them, and they're fairly straight. Cut a little bit crooked there, but that's not a big deal. And I'm only put double-sided tape on one side, doesn't matter the side, but outside surfaces need to face each other. Okay, so this is our bottom edge. I'm going to break it, and then I'm going to take this side, and I'm going to fold it over like this. Let's move it over so I can kind of baste it a little bit more easily by having it on the table. So I need my peak to be on the table too. There it is, right there. So now I'm going to peel off the transfer paper, revealing that glue. And we're starting up here at the top. So be careful when you're basting that you don't stretch one side more than the other, unless you're off when you get to the bottom, because you can actually make modifications if you're slightly off. But since our sides are the same length, they should be correct. So I'm just matching up the edges, trying not to pull too much on the top panel as I baste it together. Sometimes by lifting the fabric off the table, it's actually a little bit easier to not pull one more than the other. I don't like basting like this, but when I have to pull fabric over, sometimes this prevents me from stretching the fabric. Even if it were a little bit off, I still wouldn't worry about it. And this one is going to be a teeny bit off, but gee whiz, that's pretty stinking good, like that. Now we're going to sew it. Says that. Okay, I put my magnetic guide on at a 1/2 inch. I'm just going to start at the bottom here, and we do want to do some reversing. That's good. We'll sew right along this all the way to the top, and when we get to the top, I'll show you what we do there. I'm going to sew up and into the actual fold of the material and do some reversing there. There we go. And we are going to do a top stitch on this. So this is where the midship is, which means I'm going to roll my seam allowance up so that the water, if it goes this, I mean, it probably doesn't matter, but I think the water will shed this way more than the other way. I hope I'm right. So I'm going to put my seam allowance that direction, and basically all you got to do is just put this in the machine again. It isn't that hard. It may seem like it's difficult, but it's not hard to do a top stitch. Reverse at the beginning and just pull your fabric apart as you sew. And we'll sew all the way up to the top, and I'll show you what we do there. So we're coming up to the top here, and this is where the pleat stops, and I'm just pulling the fabric apart, making sure my seam allowance is over to the right. And when I get to that juncture where the fabric basically ends, I don't want to sew off of the fabric and sew into one layer, so I'm just going to do reversing there before I get to a single layer. And that is your top stitch.
To gain access to the boat underneath the cover, we're going to create a zipper opening at the stern.
This is the slit for the zipper, so we can gain access midship at the transom. And I'm going to take my yardstick to the point here. I don't know if you can see that, but this is the point. And I'm going to put it on here, and I'm going to try to find the most logical straight line that I can, which looks like right about there. So these are outside, but these are inside, and I'm going to strike a line. A straight line. This is the line I'm going to cut on. Now I didn't really add a 1/2 inch seam allowance. That's because our zipper is basically going to be running right along this edge, or almost on this edge. And our length is 69.5 based on this ruler. So we want this one on this side to be 69.5 as well. And we need to find the best spot to position it. And at 69.5 would be right there. And I'm going to strike a line. So we have 2 equal sides. We're going to cut right on top of that straight line that we made all the way to the point. Now we are going to reinforce this point up here. So we've cut our pleat. This is where the end of the boom is. I'm going to flip this over, and I'm going to reinforce that spot. So I'm just going to flip it over enough that I can get a patch on there nicely and lay it all flat. So you may be asking, why is there all these puckers here? Well, there's shape here. This is the end of the boom. So I'm going to try to work it out as best I can, about 1 inch or so up here, so that I can lay this shelter right. This is a 3-inch wide tape that you can buy from Sailboat, and I'm only going to cut it, I think I'm going to cut it to about there. I want to reinforce this area a little bit and a little bit up into there where our slit's going to end. It doesn't matter if you do it to the right side or the wrong side. I only put it on 3 sides. I didn't mean 4 because it's going to hang off the edge here. So there's none down here at the bottom short side. Peel that off, and it's going to hang over the edge a little bit. It's going to go up here. And I'm going to try to keep this centered like that. And then I'm going to try to work out as many of those wrinkles as possible, understanding that the shape is meant to be built into this. So if I just do it so it's flat up against there, then the shape will hopefully still be there. Now we're going to sew around this perimeter. So I've got my material in here, and I'm just going to sew close to the edge. It doesn't really matter. I'm going to try to keep it looking nice. But my pedal's underneath the fabric. There we go. A little bit of reversing there. We'll just follow this edge, making sure that it's staying down where I basted it. When I get to the corner, I'm going to bury my needle coming up, pivot on the needle, rotate the material around, make sure there's no excess material underneath. I can sometimes stick my hand under there to make sure that there isn't any, and yep, we're clear. Lower the foot, sew down this side, do the same thing here. And let's see, I think I'll just twist the fabric around. Sometimes you don't have to, but I'm going to. I'm going to shove it all underneath the throat of the machine because it's pretty light fabric. Just enough to get it twisted around. There we go. That's all it took. And then we want to make sure that we're basted in the right spot, which I think we are. Then we can sew down this side. So I'm going to trim it to the triangle up here, the shelter right, so that the binding will basically tack it into place here, and that gets rid of that. And then I'm going to cut a slit, because this is where the topping lift is, right in the middle, and our binding is going to go all the way up to about there, and we're going to stop, okay? So let's bind it.
Our skirt is about 4.5 inches. That's what we entered in the calculator. We'll be working on that next. A skirt is added to the tent fabric to create an edge around the cover that typically goes down from the lifelines if you're measuring from there, or from the rail, and a line runs through it so that it can be tensioned tightly around the perimeter of the boat for a tighter fitting cover.
We'll be making the skirt depth 4.5 inches, and it says to cut our skirt material to 8 inches.
The requirements of the skirt are in the fabric calculator. We need about 12 panels that are 60 inches by 8 inches in width.
We need to make a skirt before we sew any of the zippers or anything like that. So I'm just marking every 8 inches. Then I will use a straight edge, and I'll strike a line and cut major strips together and sew them together. We've cut out all the strips that are required. There's only 4 here on the table, but this saves on cloth usage because I went along the width. It does mean that you have to sew them all together, which is kind of a pain, but most people want to save on fabric. Outside surfaces would face each other. That's this side and this side, and we'll take it to the machine and we'll just sew a 1/2 inch, reversing at the beginning here, reversing at the end here. And then we'll make sure that we take the next one, outside surfaces facing the ends, and do the same thing until we get them all together.
Our strips are all sewn together. We're going to sew a top stitch onto this, so we're going to just lay our seam allowance to one side. Doesn't really matter for the skirt. You don't have to do this. This is more strength, and it also, in my opinion, makes it look better. So a little bit of reversing at the top, just like we did with all the other top stitches, and then just make sure you're sewing through the flange on the underside, or the seam allowance, I should say. Reverse there. Then what I typically do is I just leave the material in the machine. Let's put this through the throat, like that, hang it out the back, and then just go to the next piece. I don't even take it out of the machine. Reverse it around. Doesn't matter which side the flange goes on, but we're going to put it on the right. Sorry. And then just keep sewing.
Makes production a little bit faster because you have to do this for every panel. This is our skirt, and the seam allowance
is up, so this is the wrong side. I'm going to make sure that that's the case. And we're going to take the length of it, and we're going to put a chalk line at 1 inch. So I'm using a clear acrylic ruler. You could use it whatever you'd like for this. And we're going to put a mark at 5 inches up from the fabric's edge for the sleeve. Okay, so 1 inch and 5 inch, and we're going to mark all the way down the length like that. Now when you get to any of the seams, you're going to find that they're slightly shorter or sometimes they're longer. Don't worry about it, just do the average of it. We're just going to create a 1/2 inch hem here, and then we're going to create a sleeve to 5 inches there. So if it's slightly off, it won't matter at all. Now we're going to put double-sided tape very close to the raw edge, but not sticking out of the raw edge, so it's probably a 1/16 inch down. And we're going to do this down the entire length. When I reach the end right down here, we do the typical thing. We put the double-sided tape on the material, we smooth it out, and then we just move the material and do the next portion of basting, and we repeat the process till we reach the end. We're back at the beginning again, and now we're going to peel off the transfer paper. I usually do 1 full table length all the way to there, and then I come back over here, and you just want to baste up to that line. And this creates a 1/2 inch hem, and we'll sew through this, which will help to strengthen the sleeve, and it also gives it a finished edge. This is basted down. Now we'll put basting tape here to create the sleeve all the way down its running length. So again, about 1/8 inch away from the fold. And we're going to insert the rope, or the line I should say, in to the sleeve as we create it. But first we need to put this all the way down its length. This is our 1/8 inch leech line. I'm going to put out about 1 foot, and I'm going to use a clamp to make sure that it stays there, because sometimes it doesn't. And then I'm going to run this down the middle of this area over to here. Probably just put it on the floor like that. And then we're going to peel off the transfer paper, and we're going to create the sleeve and insert the rope at the same time. So again, I'll go down the length of the table, and that way I can just move my panel when I'm done. And we'll just baste up to this line like that, all the way down, making sure that the leech line is pushed well into the fold, because I don't want to be sewing through it. And when we reach the end of the table, we'll pull the fabric like this and continue down until we're done. Now we want to sew close to this edge because you really want to sew through your 1/2 inch hem on the bottom. So I'm just going to use this foot as my guide, and I'm going to do some reversing, though this will probably be cut at specific spots. So this is an easy job. Just keep the fabric lined up to the right side of the presser foot, if that's the side that you're sewing on, and then just keep sewing. Everything's basted in place, so it's really easy.
Webbing loops are now added to the skirt so that we can pull the cover over top of the boat and tension it. Here's a look ahead at those webbing loops. A line is attached, a trucker's hitch is created, and the cover is then pulled taut. And we'll do this all around the perimeter of the boat. We'll place the loops at 60 inches apart, but you can have more loops if you'd like for a tighter fitting cover. It's your choice.
So I'm cutting my polyester webbing 1 inch to 10 inches, and we have like 14 or 15 panels, so I basically need to cut 15 of these. Whoa. All right, we're going to put about a 1 or 2 inch strip of basting tape on both sides of the webbing on each piece, so we can baste it in place and then take it to the machine and sew. At each one of the seams, we're going to put a loop of webbing. That's every 60 inches. And what I do is I peel off the transfer paper, and I kind of find the center just by doing that so that the ends are lined up. And then I just push it over the fabric, so I have one loop on one side and one on the other. And we put it on. You have to determine how high it goes on your sleeve, but you want approximately 1 inch of loop hanging over the edge. And then just make sure this is directly over on the opposite side, and check. It looks good. And what I do is I just sew right into that seam with a zigzag stitch. Now you can do a straight stitch, just do several straight stitches if you have a straight stitch machine only. So I start at the top and I reduced my stitch length to a very small stitch length so that I get a lot of penetrations in a short distance. And I go forward and back several times there, and then I lift my foot and wiggle the balance wheel to allow the threads to come free. There we go. And I go right above where my sleeve is sewn on, and I sew another row of zigzags. Now if you want to measure and everything and be accurate for every one of them, you can, but I don't think it's necessary. Now we're done with that loop, and I just cut my trailers, and we'll go to the next seam and do the same thing. We'll do this for every seam, which is about every 60 inches.
As we mentioned at the beginning, you can always install more. You just may need more webbing. We'll now sew the skirt on the bow cover and the aft cover.
And this is a zipper location, stay or shroud, zipper. So we're going to put this skirt on the edges that don't have zippers. And you need to put the skirt on before you put the zippers on. So we're going to start here, and this is going to be hemmed, so we're going to have to open this up and create a hem. And we need outside surfaces to face each other. So this is our seam, and you can tell the outside's up, and this is our outside of our sleeve. So outside surfaces face each other. You could put double-sided tape on, but I don't. I usually just take it to the machine, and I sew a 1/2 inch down the entire perimeter until we get to the other side where the zippers are. So let's go ahead and do that. Put the magnetic guide at a 1/2 inch, right there on the needle plate, needles in center position. Outside surfaces are facing each other. We're going to kick this over about 1 inch, maybe a little bit more, and we're going to sew around the perimeter. We are going to do a top stitch as well, but first we'll do this. If your edges aren't even, don't worry about it. Just tear it off as you go. I'm going to do a little bit of reversing to make sure that it doesn't pull out. And I'm just going to match up the edges, just like this. Now don't worry about the placement of the webbing loops. Okay, we put them on every 60 inches, and we're not going to move any of them, but we might add more after we're done. We probably will add more. So just keep sewing around like this. When we reach the zippers on the opposite side, we're going to stop, and we'll do a top stitch and show you how to do that. Okay, we've come to the other side where the zipper comes down, so we're going to cut this skirt about 1 inch long, but we don't want to cut through the line. So let me just cut it here. I'll cut through my stitching here. I can feel the line that's over here. So we're going to cut up to that point, and then I'm going to take the line and push it like that. And I have plenty of line on this side. I know I do. So I'm going to pull out a couple feet. At the end I have more than enough, and I'll straighten out the sleeve on that side a little bit later. So we're just going to cut it with scissors here. So that gives me plenty, and I can cut all the way through now. And we have 1 inch, and we're going to go ahead and finish this up all the way to the end and do a little bit of reversing. And now we're going to do our top stitch, so we'll show you how to do that next. We want the seam allowance to go up like this to my left. Why? Water will shed off like this better. So all I'm going to do is put my foot down like we showed before and do a little bit of reversing here at the end and make sure the seam allowance is going the right way, and sew around the perimeter like this with our top stitch. Pull left and right and make sure that you're sewing on that seam. Check your seam allowance, just keep going. This is where the zipper goes, and we made the sleeve a little bit long. We probably didn't need to do that, but it's not a bad idea. So I'm going to cut it so it's even, but I want to make sure that I don't cut my my line in the process. So I'm going to move my line out of the way and cut through, and that is done.
In this chapter, we'll show you how to cut the slits for any obstacles, like stanchions.
So this is probably a stanchion. It's got the plus in it. We want to make a slit that is 1 inch longer than that because we want a little bit of wiggle room. So I'm going to put this on 1 inch, and I want to put this perpendicular to the bottom edge. That's why I use the clear acrylic ruler. It doesn't have to be perfect, but it has to be close. And then I'll just strike a line. I know that my cut is going to stop there. So I have a line in here, and so what I'm going to do is I'm going to push it up to the top where my stitching is so that I can cut with scissors. And you can use a hot knife to do this as well, but I'll cut all the way to that line, then I'll push the line down, and you can see it right there. And I will cut the rest of the way through my skirt and up to my obstacle to the line that we indicate that we want to stop there at.
In retrospect, after the cover was completed, we decided that it would probably be better had we gone 2 inches past the X for the obstacle, in this situation a stanchion, rather than 1 inch. Why is that? Well, if we cut it a little bit deeper, we would have been able to pull the cover a little bit tighter on the boat and not have the obstacle run into the top of the slit. So 2 inches is probably better than 1 inch.
Now, what I'm going to do with the line, I know I have excess on both ends. So I'm going to take the line and just pull out that much, just about 1 inch. There's no reason to pull out any more because we're going to put hooks on this. So we're going to cut it with a hot knife so it doesn't unravel. If you don't have a hot knife, use scissors and then burn the ends with a lighter carefully. That way it won't unravel. And now we're going to take a seam ripper, because we have to open this up because we're going to put binding on this, and we're going to come back about 3 inches or so, maybe a little bit more. And we're going to rip some of these stitches out. And then I turn it over. I know that I started there. I ripped these out, and then I can pretty much catch these and just pull, and all the stitches are released. And that opens up this sleeve so that we can bind it from here all the way up to here. So we do that here, and we'll go over here and do it in the same manner here. And that opens up the area where our rope is so we can put our hooks on too. So let me get this out and I'll show you what's next. So you can see we have access to the line now. So these basically take up 2 inches. So at the end of the line, I'm going to make a bowline. So I'm going to leave a little bit of a tail, make a loop. I'm going to put my hook on there. I'm going to go through the loop from the underside. Then I'm going to come around the bottom side, and then I'm going to go through the middle, through the top. And now I have my bowline line. The nice thing about this is that it puts it very close to the end of the line so it doesn't take up much room like that. And we did the same thing with this one. There's a link in the description to show how to do this with a great video.
These hooks will be used for all slits. However, where the bow cover zips onto the aft cover, only one hook will be attached at either end. The other end will just be a line, and it'll be secured to the single hook and tensioned well so the line around the perimeter of the boat is taut. We highly recommend making one slit at a time and then sewing the binding on, which will be shown in the next chapter. Then move on to the next slit where the obstacle rests and complete it in the same manner as shown here. Now that the slits are made, we're going to sew binding on each edge.
We have our 1 inch swing away binder, and I'm using a polyester binding in a different color. I think it looks good, but you can match the color or use whatever brand binding you want. This is a 1 inch binding, and usually you have to increase the tension a little bit, so you may want to test that before you sew when you're sewing through the binding, when you're doing light fabrics like this. And we have our sleeve opened up here, and we're going to push it into the binder, and we're going to do a little bit of reversing at the beginning. So we're going to sew right here, and we're going to make sure that we're feeding the fabric well into the mouth of the binder. Now we've got some double-sided tape on here, but that shouldn't interfere. So make sure you're pushing the fabric well into the mouth of the binder. Now when we come to this part where it is split, we're going to have to force the fabric in, and it'll create a little bit of a wrinkle, and don't be alarmed by that. So there's our split. I'm pulling the fabric almost straight. And what I like to do is I like to use another tool to push the fabric into the mouth there, because it doesn't want to go in there. And you want to push that in even if there's a little wrinkle. Don't worry about that.
Okay, we're almost to that split. I'm going to straighten out my fabric a little bit, trying to reduce the wrinkles as much as I possibly can. There will always be a wrinkle there. Okay, I'm past the slit. Now I'm going to make sure that I don't have any cover fabric actually folded underneath, because I don't want to sew through it. And just keep feeding it in. When we get to the end, we're going to do some reversing. Here's the end, and we'll do a little bit of reversing, and we are done with the binding. So we're going to use a hot knife and just touch the end of the binding, cutting it off so that it's equal with the sleeve, and we'll do that to the other one as well. And here I do want to show you the small wrinkle you can expect here. This is not uncommon for this kind of a wrinkle like that, so don't be alarmed by that. So I'm going to take the hook and I'm going to hook it right at this location, and that's kind of at the fold location, and we're just going to push this over the top, and we're going to start sewing to reclose up the sleeve. And I want to start sewing about 1 inch on top of my previous stitches. I'm going to lower my foot so I can keep out of the camera's eye, and do a little bit of reversing here to lock the stitch. Okay, when we get to the binding, we'll have to be a little bit careful because it'll want to not walk over that binding because it's really thick there. So what I'll do is I'll sew up to this point, right, like this, and notice it doesn't want to walk up there. So needle's buried, I'll lift my foot. The needle doesn't have to be buried. I'll lower the foot on top of the binding. I'm going to try to keep this straight. All my fabric is falling off. And what I'm going to do is just reverse really well on top of that binding, and then that is done, and we're going to do the same thing to this one. The nice thing about these clips is they actually clip in here and stay hooked onto here so you don't lose your line. The little clip actually clicks onto the binding, but you want to make sure that when you do your next sleeve that this is all laying nice and flat and the line is not kinked up in here before you make your next cut. So here's my line for my next cut, and remember I just pull out a little bit and I basically use the hot knife right there, and that way we have it perfectly done. So we're going to repeat this process for all of our slits besides the slits for the zippers.
The only boot in this quick winter boat cover is for the mast. We're going to show you how to do that next.
This is the bow cover, and I put the pattern back on the cover and positioned it in the right spot. You can see that here I've cut this out to mimic the mast, but it's going to be cut off. But I forgot to mark where the end of the mast was. So I'm just going to take my soapstone and mark it there, 'cause that's what I needed. I needed those marks that I forgot. So this is my mast, and I need to make a boot for it. This is the only boot in this quick cover that we're going to have. We have another video showing making a cover with boots everywhere, but this needs a boot to stabilize the center at the mast. So that's what we're going to do next. Okay, so that's gone, and then let's go ahead and we're going to cut this off. Now I'm not adding any seam allowance. I don't care if it's a tight fit or if it's a little bit on the loose side. We're going to be able to wrap it around. Okay, so that's not a perfect shape, but it won't matter. So I made mine 8 inches tall is what I made it, and so I added 2 inches for a double hem at the top and a 1/2 inch. So I made this 10 inches tall by 24 inches long, because I need at least 21, I think it was, but I wanted to have extra because I can always cut off the extra. And we're just cutting it with a hot knife with a cutting glass on the bottom. This is the urethane coating on the back side, I can tell, so I'm going to flip it so the urethane coating is facing up. Then I'm going to mark a line at 2 inches to create our 1 inch double hem. I'm going to put double-sided tape on this top edge. You could barely see the line that I struck at 2 inches, but I can see it. And then I'm going to fold it once, and then I'm going to put double-sided tape on it again and fold it twice. So here we're going to fold up to the line, put double-sided tape here, do a double hem, and then I'll show you what's next.
Along the bottom edge, I'm going to cut little slits about 1/4 inch away from each other, going no deeper than our 1/2 inch seam allowance, and this will allow it to go around the circle a little bit easier. So I'm going to do this all the way along the bottom edge. I'm going to sew this double hem just along the bottom edge. You could sew it at the top if you want to, but this is enough. And I'm going to do some reversing here at the beginning, and we're going to sew all the way to the other end and do some reversing there as well. So we're going to take this, and outside surfaces are facing each other. You notice the hem is up. And if I sew it starting here, then the bulk of the fabric will be outside the throat of the sewing machine. And I'm going to follow it around here and sew all the way to this side. And then when I'm done, I'm going to just cut the fabric so that it is in line with this edge. So let's take it to the machine and we'll start sewing here. We want this to follow this line. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to match it up to this edge here. And then I'm going to match it up to this here. We don't have to worry about this because this is going to be bound later on with binding. And I'm going to put a staple here in our 1/2 inch seam allowance and a staple here. So I know that that's the right position for it. Now I can start sewing here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to force the fabric to take the turn at that locale. So let's start right here. And I'm going to do some reversing here. Definitely want to reverse. And we'll walk right on top of our line that we struck 1/2 inch from the edge, matching up this edge as we go. You will have a little bit of puckers, but most of those puckers will be outside of our actual boot. And we'll sew around this cover. And we are going to do a top stitch. Sometimes if I make adjustments, I bury the needle and move my fabric around. And you can see that I'm following that edge pretty good. Just force the fabric around. So my seam allowance is better if it goes up towards the boot. Why is that? Because look, it creates beautiful runoff. So when the water runs, it'll shed like a shingle. So seam allowance up by the boot. We're just going to sew top stitch around the perimeter here, reversing here at the beginning and reversing at the end. Pull the seam apart as you sew, like we did any of the top stitching. That's all there is to it. This side is correct because we stapled it on here. With this side, I'm just going to side up it and look to see where it would fall in line with the other side of the panel, and I'm going to mark it. And it looks like it needs to be cut right there. So we'll use a hot knife and we'll cut it to there and it'll match up. And this boot will be done except for obviously the tie. So a zipper goes up here and there's a shroud here, there's a plus there, and then it goes to the mast. So we need to open this up just like we've done before so that we can sew binding on. So because we're going to use a binding on these zippers instead of doing a fold. It's a real quick way and it's actually pretty strong. So we have it in the binder, and we're going to do some reversing at the end. And we're just going to carefully feed it into the binder, being fed nicely. And when we get to the mast boot, we'll do some reversing there. I'll show you what that looks like when we get to that point. Where that double hem is, and we'll reverse well. Okay, that side is done. Now we're going to start here on this boot and sew down this side in the same manner, and we'll have it completed. Okay, once the binding is on, we're going to put the rope back in here. We're going to sew these shut just like we did before. We're not going to show that. We're going to do that on the port and starboard side.
Before we can create the boot for the aft cover, we need to add zippers to the bow cover.
This is our mast boot, and this is the starboard side, and this is our Linzip number 10, and it is a separating zipper. So the starter box and the starter pin are going to be installed over here. So let's separate the zipper because one side goes on the bow portion of the cover and the other one goes on the aft. Okay, so we've got the pin side and we have the starter box side. So because the slider is a single pull slider, we're going to put the starter box over here on the bow, and it's going to go underneath here like that. So this I'm going to save for the other cover, so I'll set that aside. We're going to put 1/4 inch seam stick
for canvas and upholstery on the flange of the zipper. And this 1/4 inch keeps it away from the zipper's teeth, so I'm going to put it really close to the edge of the zipper's flange. Okay, so we'll just do this all the way down this length. Now this zipper is longer than our required application. Our stay is here where we marked it, so we're going to be cutting it shorter. But you do need to use a separating zipper anytime that you have an obstacle that you have to go around. We're going to separate the basting tape, or the transfer paper. So I'm going to start or have the zipper start over here and not be right on the end, but very close to it. And the slider is going to be in the way. Let's just move the slider down. And we want the teeth to be hidden by the binding. So you can see that the teeth are basically right on the edge of the binding, and baste it down the entire length like that. We can move our slider back up now that we have that basted on and continue to baste to our stay. So there's my stay location, and I'm just going to cut the zipper approximately 1 inch. It doesn't have to be exact. Save this. We're going to use this to create a stop, so I'll set that aside. So now we have the second part of the zipper, and you can see it's way too long, which is completely acceptable, but it is a separating zipper. We're going to remove this portion, and we're going to put double-sided tape again on this side with the box, and it's going to be put on so that's 1 inch or so down from the stay location, and it'll be put on in the same manner that we did there. So we're going to do that next. So we're here at the bottom edge of our skirt. And notice that I don't have a hook on this end. The reason I don't is that we're probably going to tension the skirt at the zippers, so I just left my line extended there. We're going to cut the zipper just a little bit below where this sleeve was created, so not going into the leech line. Let's just get this up so you can see it. I'm going to do it right about there. And I've pulled the slider up already, so our zipper ends right there. Now I'm going to go ahead and remove the sliders because I don't have stops on this, and make sure you keep them that way. We don't have to work around them when we sew this. So now we're going to take this to the machine and sew. Okay, so because of the fact that I don't want to sew into the binding and I want to sew off of the edge, we're only going to sew through 1 layer, but including the zipper, it's fairly strong this way. I put in a roping zipper foot left, so all I have to do is keep the center foot up against the binding, but I do need my needle to be in the right position to be as close as possible to that binding. So here's the end, and I'll just do some heavy reversing. We don't want to go light on the end of a zipper. Okay, and just sew up the edge, keeping that foot against the binding, and you probably should check to make sure that you're sewing through the flange of the zipper, and as you can see we are, so we are good to go. We're going to sew all the way up against this side, and when we get to the end, I'm going to continue sewing. I'm not going to break my stitches, but I am going to reverse at the end, so we're almost there, and I'll show you. Okay, so here we are at the end, and what I'm going to do, since I know that is the end, is I'm going to reverse, and then I'm going to continue sewing until I reach the next zipper, which is right there, and then I'm going to reverse here, and then continue sewing. When we get to the top, we'll do some reversing there, and we'll show you what's next. This really is a nice way to make a zipper and to still have a flap to protect the teeth. It's really quick and easy. The only issue with it is you're going through 1 layer of fabric instead of 2, but you also have that flange. So this is a great option for any kind of zipper. Now before you put your stop on, put the slider back on. This is the wrong side, and make sure you zip it all the way up to make sure that it's exactly installed appropriately, and it is. So now we're going to take some of those teeth that we have, and I'm just going to cut 2 off of my scrap, and I'm going to sink it into the end, and I'm going to use a mallet to press it if I have to. Let's see if I have to. I'm going to try to push it in with my fingernails.
So it's sunk into place. Now you want to use a hot knife and carefully do this. So I'm going to first cut off the flange. This is just one way to create a stop. We do sell stainless steel stops too if you want to do it that way, but this way it doesn't cost you anything. Now carefully melt this. All you want to do is basically create a sheen and then go no more. And you want to do it on both sides. And this will lock in the teeth. Like that. And that should be sufficient. Oh, this side needs a little bit more, I can see. There we go. So I'm going to take the other side and I'm going to zip it on so we don't lose it for the other side of the cover. And I'm also going to come down here to where it ends, and I'll know what the perfect length is by cutting it to that same length or close to it right there. And we'll leave it in place and we'll do the same thing with this one. Okay, so we have this one installed and we're going to do the same thing over here. I think this is the port side. The issue is I can't put this one on with the starter box here. I actually have to put the pin on here. So all you have to do is just think about the way the zipper goes. So we have a pin over here, we have a starter box over here. So we're going to put basting tape on this and we're going to do the exact same thing that we did over here. We're not going to show it, but we'll show you what it looks like when we're done.
Now that our zippers are sewn on the bow cover, we can start on the boot for the aft cover.
This is our bow panel, and we already have the boot sewn in, we have the zipper sewn in. And I did cut this out, basically thinking that, oh, that's the right way to do it, but it is in the correct way. And what I need to do is I need to cut it out so that this boot comes to be equal. The only way to do that is to take the one that we finished, which is the bow cover, and take a tape measure, flexible one, and start at the bottom skirt edge and carefully walk the tape measure along the edge, following any kind of shape that it has. So I'm going to walk this all the way up to where the boot is connected, and then we'll show you a close-up of that. So come over here. So here is our boot, and I'm going to measure to the seam allowance, which is folded up. So I get 63 inches. You can see it right there. I'm not measuring to the seam, I'm measuring to the seam allowance right there. So on the aft panel, which does not have the binding or the zipper, we're going to do the same thing up to that point of 63 inches so that these edges are exactly the same. Now this one has a little bit of a curve to it, and I definitely want to follow that edge. That's why we walk it up slowly like this. .63 falls right there, so I mark it with chalk. And that needs to be where the opening is so that it will be the exact same boot height as our bow cover when we're done. So if you start with the aft one, it's the same process. You would just reverse it and do this exact process with the bow cover. But we put the zippers on the bow first. Now we also want to do the same thing on this side. We'll measure it and find out where that is, and we'll mark it here on this side as well. Now I'm using a flexible ruler basically to do this. You don't have to have this, just ferret out to something that looks pretty good. Remember, a Mast boot is going to take up any oddities in size and shape. This one you can tell is a little bit off compared to this one, but that's what we measured, and you need to trust your measurements. So we're going to cut this with a hot knife. So outside surfaces will face each other. We'll sew this on, then we'll sew our binding on like we did over here, and then we'll show you how to match up the zippers between the bow panel and the aft panel. We already have this side done. This is the bow, this is the aft cover. We put one side of the zipper on, but here's how you do it. What you want to do is you want to match this up and then mark where the zipper starts. So I'll just mark it here. Then we would baste it on like this, just like we did on the opposite one, go all the way down, and then we'll mark at the bottom. So I'll baste this on, and then we'll show you how we mark for the next zipper. Since we cut this one off and already put a stop on it, we know where this is going to end up. It's going to be right across from the end of this one. And here's the second zipper. So I'm going to mark it here, and that's where we'll baste on the other half. And we'll go all the way to the bottom, and we'll sew it on in the same manner that we showed earlier. We're not going to show that.
To close the top of the boot, we're going to add a webbing closure on it. That's next.
So I used some of the webbing and I made I attached a side release buckle. I didn't show any of this, but this is what we're going to use around the mast boot. And what I typically do is I take this part, the female, and I put it on. I like to put it on right here along one of the sides, whether it be the port or the starboard side, and put it down about 1.5 inches to 2 inches. And I'll just sew it in place here and leave this all loose, and it'll wrap around and buckle, and then you can tension it. We will sew this on here, but we're not going to show it.
Now for the zipper at the transom so we can gain access to the boat when the cover's on.
This is the midship where the end of the boom is. And if you remember right, in a previous chapter, we reinforced this with a 3-inch Shelterite tape, heavy vinyl basically. So here's the skirt end of this, and what we're going to do is we're going to open this up like we showed before, just some of the stitches. We're going to sew binding on starting at the end and sew all the way up. There is a little bit of a shape here, and then sew binding down that leg. Then we're going to add a separating zipper to it. This is a double pull slider, so we can gain access inside the boat, and we can also close it up if we're working on it in the wintertime. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the 1/4-inch basting tape. Doesn't matter the side because this is a separating zipper, and it does have a slider that can be used on both sides. So we're going to put double-sided tape on both sides of the flange, on obviously one side only. So we want the starter box to be up here so that we can zip it down, because we're going to be attaching it near the end of the boom. So I'm going to start it about 2 inches away from this edge, and we're going to baste on this side, and then we're going to baste on this side. Okay, you want to, for long zippers like this, you may want to actually pin it in place as well, because I'm finding that the double-sided tape doesn't hold exceptionally well because it's so long. And you definitely want to sew one half on first and then sew the other half on, making sure they're directly across from each other. That's just a little tip.
Our quick winter boat cover is now complete. It's time to install it on the boat.
It's now time to see if everything fits appropriately, and we start here at the end of the boom. And this is where our zipper is. So far, so good. So once that's started, then I'll just walk this over the boom. And I already have my cover at the bow. And while we're up here, we're going to go ahead and start the zipper. So the right here. Okay, and on this side as well. It's cold out here. It's time for a winter cover. Okay, so we have it zipped down enough that I could probably reach it. And now we have our boot, and we have a strap for it. And you can see the boot is very large, but because of the strap, we can come around and buckle it and then pull in the excess. So I'll buckle it here and then just pull it in until it fits snugly. Look at that, that works really well. I don't know if I want to be above this hardware or not, since this is the first time we've ever installed it. Good. Okay, the tiller may have to leave. We'll find out here in a second. Goes around here. Here's an obstacle. Looks like that's going to work pretty well. But we could just stop the zipper at a certain location too. There's an obstacle here. One here, and we can start clipping these clips. Just to release them, just do this and they'll come out. Like that, around that. We can't tension it until we get everything in the right spot. So that's what I'm going to do. So I'm going to keep going around and clipping these at each one of the obstacles. This keeps the line from going inside, so even though it seems like it's taking a while, this is a good thing, because fishing line through, see, like this one's already trying to go in, is not much fun. There we go. Do it over here. So we're going to zip down to the stay here, and then we're going to come around it, and we're going to zip this up. Start that up. This is supposed to go underneath. That's how we designed it. So at the zipper we have one hook, and what I want to do is I want to tension this line all around the perimeter. Obviously we have to have it tied everywhere and hooked everywhere to do this, but the zipper's unzipped a little bit, and then I'll just grab it, and then I will create a knot here. We drew this string up tight around the rail and we tensioned it. Now we're just doing the bowline knot here to each one of our webbing loops. Then we're going to do a trucker's hitch, and there is a link in the description to a great video that shows how to do this, but that's basically what it is. And then we go down to the trailer. In our situation, you could go all the way around the belly or the hull of the boat, but we're just going to the trailer. And then we're going to go through our trucker's hitch, and we're going to draw this taut. So you want to do this around the perimeter, and you can make adjustments if you need to. So now that I have that fairly taut, I'm going to pinch this. I'm going to create my little loop-de-doo here, pull that up, and that's tight. Now we need to cut our line, so it's good idea to have the serrate edge hot knife that's cordless, because you can just take it anywhere. In this freezing cold day, my hands aren't even working very well, and then you don't have to worry about unraveling. And then this goes around like that, and that is ready. So we're going to go around all around the perimeter doing that. Here's another one, and we'll show you what it looks like when we're done. Okay, so we have webbing loops that we've attached to for the trucker hitches, but if you don't have a webbing loop, like here, there's kind of like a large span where we didn't have one. We can either go back and sew one on, or you can actually just use these splits and actually do an attachment point down here, which is not a bad idea. Even this split would actually work like that. And I think I will put one here because it looks like it would tighten up the cover nicely.
Even though we're still in the process of securing the cover to the boat, the quick winter boat cover is now complete. You may notice that at each of the slits, the fabric is running into the obstacle, say for instance a stanchion, while the cover is being tensioned on the boat. That's because we only allowed for 1 inch gap above the obstacle. As we mentioned in the video, it would have been better if we allowed for 2 inches of slit fabric above the obstacle. Had we done that here, we would have been able to pull the cover more snugly over the boat. See the full materials and tools list in the description of this video below. Use the fabric calculator for a detailed list of materials that are required for your boat. I'm Eric Grant, and from all of us here at Sailboat, thanks for watching.